All right, so the next thing we want to get into is a really important topic. It has to do with the targeting phenomenon and the mind-reality feedback loop. In other words, how your personal vibe and your personal frequency, your mindset, ties into being targeted by negative forces. Now, Carissa, you've had a lot of experience with this and you've learned quite a bit from it too. So why don't you get into what you experienced and what you learned from all of it?
Yeah, well, I learned firsthand and accidentally that our own thoughts and personal frequency can reinforce and actually escalate targeting, not only with hyperdimensional entities and aliens, but even with what we think of as physical harassment by physical, quote, gangstalkers or even MILABs. So I learned that even physical-based harassment by what we assume are people isn't what we believe it is oftentimes. This is all stuff I talk about in Chasing Phantoms, but we'll go over it here because most people listening to this probably haven't read the book, I'm sure. But researcher and author John Keel, he figured this out in his own way. In the Mothman prophecies, which I mentioned this earlier in our talk, but I talked about how UFOs and the woo are often a reflective phenomenon, as he described it. So, meaning, it starts reflecting back the energy being put into it by the viewer. So, the more you put into it, especially if there's fear involved, then the worse and crazier it gets until it can eventually destroy a person's life. And I experienced my own version of this when it came to the woo, of which, overlapped with aliens, hybrids, and MILABs, which is how I came to learn that it really is true in terms of being a reflective phenomenon that feeds off of you and builds on your own thoughts. So I have to start by saying that the neg and the hyperdimensional and the alien stuff didn't make itself known to me overtly all in one shot. So it's not like I woke up one day and realized I had this stuff in my life and now it started happening to me directly full blown. No, that actually would have been a free will violation, apparently. Instead, it was what I kind of call a drip feed process, more like a step-by-step process. And it's allowing me the free will right to keep going with it and to keep saying yes to it. So that's going to be a really important point that I'm about to start illustrating, the role of saying yes and allowing free will violations to happen to us. So, apparently things have been going on my whole life, but I was dissociated off from it and didn't consciously realize anything, especially about human involvement. So until you introduced me to that book, MILABs by Dr. Helmut Lammer and Marion Lammer, I had no idea about that. Didn't know such a thing existed. So I only knew about alien abductions. So, however, once I learned about things, I realized in retrospect that there were multiple indicators and even actual memory flashes involving people, including MILABs related stuff going all the way back to early childhood. And just endless examples of MK programming and tinkering that were always there, but which I'd pushed aside because I didn't have any explanation for these memories and indicators. So they were always there. It's not like I just, once I learned about it, I'm trying to retrofit stuff. I mean, it was really obviously there, but it was all stuff I had just pushed aside because I'm like, I don't know what this is. I don't know what it means. So, but I didn't forget about it happening. I just pushed it aside. And something that I've talked a lot about on my website, and I've said it in other interviews, is that realm breaching in any form does not happen overnight. It's always a step-by-step process. And in my opinion, full disclosure about something you didn't know was happening to you and which was being deliberately withheld from you due to MK programming and dissociation is a form of realm breaching because suddenly learning about it will, bare minimum, disrupt your life path. But worst case scenario can lead to full life destruction and maybe even death.
Yeah, and by realm breaching, we're basically talking about beings, whether they're human or demons or aliens, some sort of negative otherworldly force that normally occupies almost like a different band of reality, like a different frequency reality. And so you've got your life in the mainstream relatively, and they're off in their breakaway world or other dimension. So how do they then...
And they're not really allowed to just get into our reality. We're separated off for a reason, and there's rules here. So they can't just jump into our reality and start doing whatever they want and telling us things we're not meant to know about or to learn about.
Yeah. I mean, there are quantum laws that have to do with how two observers kind of lock into the same reality. There's that. There's also divine, like spiritual, metaphysical laws that govern what scripts or what events can happen per like channel of the television station of reality,
Right.
like the television spectrum of reality. So those things kind of keep a lot of the woo stuff out from the mainstream. So that's why we have an entire population that doesn't believe in ghosts or demons or aliens.
Exactly.
Because they don't experience it. Well, why don't they experience it? Do these things exist? Well, it's because each person has a personal like a synchronistic fence around them that keeps them from experiencing certain things that they're not meant to experience. Whereas other people, it's definitely within their learning path to have it, like you and me, for example. So of course we have it.
Yeah, but even like what I'm just trying to, what I was just explaining is like I had it, but it just wasn't so overtly spelled out and in my face, and like what I call full disclosure. So even then, it was being held back behind a fence, so to speak. So it's a whole topic in itself. But yeah, it wasn't even allowed to fully reveal itself, even to me, even though before I obviously incarnated here, there's an agreement or an understanding that I am going to go through this,
Yeah. So that's why free will and permission is a big part of it, because the more a person, I'm talking about it, an abductee, someone being gang stalked, someone being targeted, the more they give permission to it or entangle their own consciousness with it, the more they focus on it, obsess over it, feel like they're a big victim of it and they can't do anything about it, the more their personal world gets overlapped or merges with the world of the phenomenon.
Right. And part of that, permission means also just not saying no.
Mm-hmm.
Like not, like you just said, you're putting all your energy onto it. You're getting fear, blah, blah, blah. But you're also just not saying no. And that in itself is giving permission. That's a form of giving permission.
Yeah. So when you're dealing with these types of phenomena, they're in one place and you're in another place. But if they want to get you, if they want to control you, they have to do the step-by-step process of merging their world or their presence into your world. And that requires your participation to some extent.
And not saying no.
Yeah, so that's what you mean by realm breaching. So yeah.
Yeah, for those who aren't familiar, that's the more comprehensive explanation that hopefully everyone understands. So, and realm breaching can also involve paranormal, especially anything demonic in particular. Many aspects of the demonic require some form of permission before it can do anything to you, including possession and things like that. But for me, the transition from not knowing anything about my abductions and programming to going full disclosure started with my brother Joe. So tracing things back, I was point blank told by him countless times, going back into 1998, 1999, at least, while he was still living in Connecticut and I was in California, that, I was being told by him that he even had these thems in his life, tailing and monitoring him. And I had even experienced proof of it at one point during a phone call that he and I were on. And this crazy interference happened. So we're talking, da-da-da-da-da. And it was something actually out of the movie The Mothman Prophecies, which didn't come out until 2001, a few years later. But if people have seen that movie, there's a scene in that movie with Richard Gere talking on the phone to the entity known as Indrid Cold. And Indrid Cold blasts him suddenly through the phone receiver with this loud, screeching noise. And that's what happened with me and Joe. We were talking, and this is in the height of him telling me about all the thems and the tailing and the monitoring and all the crazy stuff going on with that. And we experienced that in the middle of the phone call, this just horrendous blasting noise. I literally did what Richard Gere does in the movie, where I pulled the phone away from my ear like that. I'd never before or since ever experienced such a thing on the phone, but it was kind of like them announcing like they're on the line and they're listening. So there's no explanation for that noise. It's not like anything I'd ever heard before. So it was definitely my sort of proof that this was definitely happening. And, there was definitely things happening in this kid's life and he's not making it up. There's always something with him, always seemed to be in the right place at the right time to witness crazy things about this reality, things that I had never experienced myself. So, but, I chose to invite him into my life despite it. So I was overlooking that, thinking that whatever's going on with him and his thems, that it has nothing to do with me, even though it did. It actually did. I would come to find out. So that was one of the first forms of saying yes, as far as they're concerned, because he was point blank telling me that this is going on in his life. And I'm like, okay. And I just keep going forward with it. So in my opinion, when I look back at it, that was the first form of saying yes. And it's what I call the Freewill occult warning thing, where there's this thing, the Freewill occult warning, where these forces are going to breach your realm in some way. Like you outlined earlier, they can't just do it. There's a step-by-step process. There's rules. There's like a fence in place. So if they do breach a little bit, they kind of give you this warning. And I've talked about it in other interviews, so people who've seen those interviews may be familiar with this, but it's kind of like where they announce themselves in some way of what they really are. And it's kind of up to you to recognize what they're saying. So, and they don't ever just say it once. That's the thing I've noticed. They'll say it at least 3 times, which is this number in the occult, the number 3. So it's to make sure that you really get it. If they say it once, you may not notice. They say it twice, maybe you're noticing, but you're still not taking it seriously. By the 3rd time of them announcing something very pointed and looking you right in the eye usually and saying it, you're going to start to realize, and you're really going to hear them now because it's been said 3 times to you. So they're really announcing, what they are. And then it's up to you to choose to hear what they're saying and to allow things to keep going, or to recognize and to say no. So this is a big factor and stuff and this is how I learned that this concept is real, because this is what was happening to me back then. And, some people may think it's not fair that we don't always recognize that we're saying yes to something and allowing that free will realm breach. But that's how the game works, as I've learned, The free will occult warning thing, it's just bare minimum. They just do the bare minimum of what they have to do based on the rules of the game and what they're obligated to do. But so long as we're fully functioning and thinking adults, then the game feels that we should therefore be smart enough to recognize those warnings and red flags. So it's on us if we don't. But, things continued after I brought Joe to California from Connecticut. I was trying to save him, which I know I mentioned earlier when we were talking, the whole try to save Joe thing. And I overlooked actual warnings coming directly from him right at the beginning after he got to California, where he was letting me know that things weren't what they seemed to be with him. So that was more of me saying yes to what was starting to transpire in my reality. So it's like the door's open now. He's standing in the doorway and it's announcing what it is multiple times in different ways now. And I'm just like, okay. So then, right after that, like we started going through the whole paranormal vortex stuff, which, I talked about earlier when we were talking, and it's on my website. Like I said before, if anybody's interested to read the full story, it's literally called The Vortex, and it's about the year I spent roommating with Joe in a paranormal apartment and everything that went on with that. And that was a big factor and stuff. During that entire debacle, I kept saying yes to keeping him around in my life, through all of that. And despite the things that were being revealed about him due to all that massive paranormal activity, it revealed a lot about the nature of Joe, what he really is. And I just kept saying yes, keeping him in my life and moving forward with everything. And I have to say, on a side note, this is kind of important, going through the massive paranormal stuff in the vortex for such an extended period of time also seemed to permanently tag me, for lack of a better way of putting it. Kind of like, when they tag animals in the wild and release them, now they can always track them forever for the rest of that animal's life. They will always know where it is, what it's doing, and it will always be on their radar to track. Well, I felt like that's what happened to me as a person with Neg's hyperdimensional stuff. It was like I got tagged. And I know you once said a few years ago that, did you say that researcher 4 said that is a real thing? I had figured it out for myself. That's how I felt. I felt like I was tagged But didn't you say that he had said that that can happen?
Right. Yeah. I mean, he knows from personal experience because he was clairvoyant, so he was able to interact with non-human beings a lot. Yeah, and he knew about how demons do their thing, and one of the things that they do is they put their, well, actually aliens do it too, but they take their own astral etheric energy chunk, like a part of their own soul, and they implant it in a person. They tag them with it, so it, according to his own words, it stains their energy field.
Yes.
And then now it's almost like a homing beacon,
Yeah.
because now a part of the entity is inside the person, and it doesn't matter if the person moves across the country or around the world. It's like a homing beacon, and the entity can just zero in right back on them.
Exactly, because that's exactly it. Because of very specific paranormal things I experienced in that apartment, it was very specific stuff, not just generic paranormal. It was very specific types of phenomenon and things like that I experienced, and I'd never experienced it before, mind you, in my life. But after going through that, it would wind up following me around in life in multiple states for many years to come. So it did not matter where I moved to. It didn't matter where I was living. I mean, and I traveled literally across the entire country. It did not matter. It just followed me around forever. So that's why I felt like, I'm actually tagged. It's like it's just like a thing that's now openly in my reality, out in the open. They're not hiding anymore. It's just all out in the open, and they always know where to find me, and this stuff will always be a part of my life. So yeah, that's an important side thing to kind of note that came out of the whole vortex thing. It wasn't just about Joe and everything that went on with him. It was an intertwined sort of thing, Joe and the paranormal, and then the paranormal now being in my life forever, but because of Joe.
So he was almost like an infectious carrier or something.
Yeah. But I have to say, on a positive note, as negative as it was, and yes, it is like an infectious carrier. It was a vector of attack. Absolutely. Very negative. However, all positive things that ever happened to me after that, in terms of even having a website, a book, anything I've ever done to, I don't know, help anybody and talk about these things, all the knowledge I have about these subjects, and any benefit it's ever done for anybody who's read my stuff at all is because of Joe and because I went through this. So it's a very double-edged sword. I mean, it's stuff that almost got me killed on multiple occasions, having him in my life, and cost me thousands of dollars, and, put me on the radar of cops because of him and the stuff he was getting up to. But all the good came out of it too. Like, I now know everything I know thanks to him and getting me started on it all. And the website, the book, everything, knowing you, everything is because of him, and only because of him. I mean, I can say that I traced it back.
Yeah, and it was probably a gamble too, right? Because I don't think it was guaranteed that it would have resulted in positive.
Yeah, it is definitely not. Like, I know that they had their little agenda where they were hoping it was going to go, and I'm going to be getting into that. So for sure, it was definitely a gamble. Mm-hmm. Like, of course, they know there's a risk that it won't work out in their favor, but there's a large risk that a chance that it will. So it was like they made their big moves. We're going for it. We're going to try to, I used to call it recruit or destroy. We're going to try to recruit you into our team, get you to work for us and not against us. And if it doesn't work, then we'll try to destroy you. So that's what I used to call it, the recruit and destroy tactic. Or recruit or destroy. Anyway, so I continued to keep going things, with Joe, despite his sociopathic behavior, including, like I was just kind of talking about, all his criminal nonsense and his cop dodging. So it was even more yes on my part, continuing to allow this realm breach and saying yes to neg stuff that was infiltrating my reality. And all because, he's my brother, which was more like programming in retrospect. The programming, it was this intense desire to keep me attached to him at all costs, no matter what he does, and even be willing to die for him. Something I also proved I was willing to do on at least one major occasion, where we literally had cops with guns pointed at our heads. And I didn't have to be in that situation, and I deliberately put myself in that situation to try to diffuse it. Like, it started with Joe and the cops, and I walked out onto the balcony knowingly. I didn't have to. I could have walked the other way and left the entire situation, and I did not. I was like, that's my little brother out there, and I will not let him get shot. I will put myself between him and the cops and do what I can do to get this to de-escalate, you know. And that means I wound up with guns pointed at me as well. So, but it, you know, obviously it did de-escalate, and that's a whole story in itself. And I talk about it actually in the Vortex. So if people want more details, it's in there. So I just kept moving forward with him in my life and saying yes to things. And by the time me and him joined up again in Portland, because we both left California, but at different times, and then we joined up again later in Portland in late 2001 into early 2002, that whole drip feed thing that I mentioned earlier, it kind of had progressed to full open disclosure by that point, because I had said yes to every single thing that came before it for almost 3 years. So all that yes, 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 yes stuff that I keep emphasizing along in this story is why full open disclosure finally did happen. So I had my first known overt abduction by that point in California in October 2001, which was discussed in detail in my book, Chasing Phantoms. So I now knew what the deal was with me being an abductee and the thems and the fact that I was involved in it. It wasn't just Joe and his thems. It was also my thems for me as well. However, I didn't understand the full story at all. And there was definitely disinformation in there in terms of what I was being allowed to know in this open disclosure, because that's the deal. They're not just going to give you full, honest, balanced disclosure. I mean, it's going to be disclosure that they wouldn't have otherwise been allowed to do, but it's mixed up with disinfo, truths and half-truths, and with the ultimate agenda to kind of steer me in the direction they wanted me to go with it all, which was not a good one. So it was a lot of distortion, and it took over 2 years, but I finally ditched Joe permanently in life when we were in Portland, after he got arrested yet again in a very bad way and almost taking me down in the process yet again, So the thing that happened in California with the guns pointed at us, no, that was not the last time in life. We were in a very bad predicament with cops. And I had told him when I got to Portland, one more time, Joe, one more time that you get arrested, and that's it, I'm done. And there were multiple cops incidents that happened while we were in Portland involving him. And then there was the final one. And I'm like, that's it, I'm done. I told you one more time and I'm done. But, walking away and severing all ties with him, it was not an easy process. You might think it would be after what I've kind of described even in brief here, but it wasn't, because again, it's my little brother as I'm seeing it at the time, and also because of the programming. So I had to fight against it and override this like insane urge to bail Joe out of jail in Portland. Well, it was outside of Portland at that point, and then take off to Florida together as we originally intended. And I'm continuing to look after him and take care of him like a mommy handler. So I know that was kind of the role that they wanted me to be with him, is to be like the everyday handler, kind of keeping my eye on him in the everyday world, make sure he's got a roof over his head. I'm giving him money, making sure he's fed because he can't keep a job.
Yeah. Well, it's not even like a handler where you're like mind controlling him. And
it's not that kind of handler.
It's just more like a
minder. I don't know what you call it. Like a mommy minder. I don't know.
Yeah.
But yeah, it's like that's the role that they can't be there 24/7. They're only there during his abductions, but they want someone to look after him, to keep him taken care of. So that was supposed to be my role, was to be that minder, I guess would be a better word than a handler. But I had that is this incident where this is when Joe was now in jail in Portland, and I'm sitting there in my car in the parking lot of a Rite Aid in the middle of the afternoon, and I'm wrestling with this programming, and I've got all these ideas in my head, like, okay, I can bail him out, and we're going to drive across the country. We're going to go to Florida, because that was the plan. Like, we were supposed to be, we're going to go to Florida next. We're going to leave Portland and go to Florida. And I'll bail him out. We'll do that, And it's just like wrestling with this program. And the intellect is like, no, this is not a good idea. You need to get away from him, but this programming, it's creating a huge conflict that you actually have to try to fight off. And in the middle of trying to fight off all this programming, that entire weekend after he got taken off to jail, I got like number sightings up the wazoo. It was absolutely insane. Every single time I looked at the clock, I was getting hit with numbers, the numbers that followed me around at the time, 141, 119, which is really, 11/9 for my birthday, 119, or some form of those. And also like the 1010s and just the repeating numbers, like all the repeating numbers. So it was constant numbers. Like my reality was blowing up, and it was numbers, numbers, numbers. And when I was sitting in my car in the Rite Aid parking lot, wrestling with getting him out of jail, I looked at my odometer, and it was at exactly 119,974. So it's almost my birthday, which is 11/9/74. So it was 119,974. It was the closest thing to my birthday. So it was just ridiculous. It was like, oh my God, the numbers. But I fought against the programming, and was able to ward it off. But the thing is, they wanted me to either basically stay in Portland and act as that everyday minder of sorts for Joe, provide for him, and while he's running around engaging in his criminal mayhem, which is part of his programming. It's part of his MK programming. The agent provocateur stuff, and they were like literally giving him assignments that they wanted him to complete to prove that he was ready for the next level. Like, it was hardcore MK stuff that I would later read about in actual mind control, like source books. Like, I read a book by Kathleen Keating that described the exact thing that they give these programmed MK targets, these, assignments. And she mentioned a very, very specific assignment that it's the same thing he was told to go do. And and then Gunther Rossbacher, he had an article about Manchurian candidates, and he talked about literally, quote unquote, prove that you're ready for the next level. The exact same stuff that Joe was saying. And he was saying it to me with his glazed over eyes, like he's reciting a script that he'd been programmed. I need to prove to myself I'm ready for the next level. And it's just like, what are you talking about? Like, and he's describing his big assignment, which was, oh my God, it would have made national headlines if he'd gone through with it. And he was actually halfway to it. Let's just put it that way. He maybe even 3/4 of the way. And I had to talk him out of it. But if I hadn't, God knows what would have happened, But it was all verbatim what these mind control sources were talking about in terms of what's done to these kids who they find, like Gunther said in his article, through the juvie and the jail system. And Joe had spent most of his teenage years in juvie, in jails, locked up. So, and that's where he even says that he was found by them and where his programming started. So he was well aware that stuff started for him when he was in juvie and jails and lockups. And that's how he came onto some stuff's radar. But actually, truly, it was like in our childhood. There was other layers of it that went all the way back many years. So, they wanted me either like kind of just basically stay with Joe in Portland and be his minder, like I was just saying, or move to Florida and bring Joe with me. But either way, it's a timeline or a future that doesn't involve you, Tom, and me. So, because if Joe was with me in Florida, then you couldn't have happened, The only reason you were able to happen is because I was in Florida by myself. But if I was with Joe being his minder and he's being crazy criminal, there's no way me and you would have happened. So either way, whatever it is they wanted, it did mean ultimately no future destiny with you and everything that we've done together and everything that came out of that. So, and it's funny because Joe did try to discourage me so many times from even talking to you back when I was in Portland, and, kept trying to convince, I know I've told you about this, but he kept trying to convince me that, you're not real. Like, he's not even real, Carissa. Why are you talking to him? Don't even bother. He's not real. Just trying all these tactics in kind of an angry way to get me to stop talking to you. Because, you were in Iowa at the time. I was in Portland, and we're talking all the time on the phone and everything. And that it just set him off. Like, it was like, stuff working through him, operating through him, clearly acting as a vector to get me to stop talking to you and trying to say anything you could think of to convince me to not talk to you anymore. So, like, during my 3.5 months when I was in Portland, it was kind of like Joe was the devil on one shoulder and you were the angel on the other. And I got both of you in my ear telling me things, and everything you're telling me is combating and counteracting the crap he's feeding me with. All the revelations about reality and who we are as abductees and who our abductors are, why we're being abducted, all these things he was telling me in Portland, a lot of which may have been disinformation mixed in with, like I said earlier, truths and half-truths. It was kind of a big mess of stuff to try to untangle. And so he's filling my ear with all this crap, and then you're the sensible angel on the other shoulder, like trying to help me work through all this crap that I'm being told by him so that I don't go off the rails, because it's very easy. You're being fed all this stuff, and it's like information overload. It's like too much. A lot of people, when they go through that, they wake up too quickly and learn too much too fast. They go off the rails with it. It leads to very bad things. It's kind of what I was trying to say earlier about, it can derail a person's life. That's what I mean. And me and you have heard about it happening. We've heard from a lot of people over the years from our websites who've emailed us who they are not doing well psychologically. They woke up too quickly and took in too much information too fast, and it was all too much, and it derailed them. So, that could easily have happened, but I had you on the one shoulder, kind of counteracting everything he was doing.
Yeah, and that was like part of a higher plan, I think.
Yeah.
For you to go into the danger zone and kind of get close to being pulled into the black hole, so to speak.
Yeah, absolutely. I feel like my whole life is like that. It's kind of like Dance with the Devil. So I can learn some things and see some stuff, but then get out just before it goes too far.
Yeah. It was like the rescue space tugboat, like nudging you out of the orbit of the black hole.
I feel like my whole life's kind of been like that. Just dance with the devil. Because I'm curious. I got to learn. I got to know. But then luckily I get out of it just in time, just in the nick of time before it goes too far. But yeah, so that's kind of like definitely what was happening in Portland. But, I got myself out of it. I listened to you and everything you were saying, and you were right. And I knew it. You recognize truth when you're hearing it, and I knew he was bad. He'd been bad news in my life for over 2 years. I mean, it's not like I didn't know. So I overrode that intense programming and cut him out of my life, took Kitty, packed up, had all my stuff in my car, and I left Portland and headed to Florida. So it was just me and Kitty. We drove cross country all the way from Oregon down into Southern California and over to Florida. So it was like 4,500 miles total, just me and Kitty. And I got to Fort Lauderdale and landed on my feet, and the thing is though, once I got to Fort Lauderdale in 2002, the craziness only continued to escalate in a more overt way. It did not stop. It's because the door had been blown wide open by that point, and just because Joe was out of the picture, it doesn't mean it was over. Once that door's open, it's open. And my job was now to get the door closed as much as possible, though I didn't realize it yet. So that part was coming up, like to even realize, okay, this door is open. I need to get this closed. This is a problem. It's followed me 4,500 miles away, So I still had some of the same very weirdly specific paranormal stuff that was happening back in the vortex in California, followed me to Florida. And then the overt harassment and stuff with the stuff associated with my abductions and the MILAB stuff started escalating once I got to Fort Lauderdale. And one of the big incidents that happened relating to this, I talked about it in part 2 of Chasing Phantoms. It's the Joseph license plate frame incident, So if ever I had any doubts that I was going off script and something was really pissed, this proved it. This anecdote, it was wild, but like it was in the middle of the afternoon. I went to take a bag of trash out to the dumpster. And so I was heading outside, and as I was walking down the sidewalk, I banged my left thigh or my left leg into a trailer hitch that was sticking out of a car that was pulled into the parking spot facing out. So the trailer hitch was closest to me. And I walked into it and banged my leg. And so I'm like, rubbing my leg as I continued to walk towards the dumpster with the bag of trash. And that in itself was kind of a synchronicity, because just before I brought the trash out, I'd been in my apartment, all of a sudden, deep and sudden thought, kind of almost out of nowhere, about how I'm so glad I'm here in Fort Lauderdale by myself, just me and Kitty, and that I did not bring Joe with me. I'm so glad I parted ways with him. And just these thoughts over and over in my head, just so glad, so glad, so glad. I'm just so glad to be here. I have this nice little apartment and life is so good and nice, and he's out of my life and it's all great. So then I went and brought the trash out, banged my leg against the trailer hitch that was sticking out. And as I started continuing to walk to the dumpster, this is where I had the whole voices in the head thing. And it's, I don't know if you want to call it voice to skull technology. Also, it's also known as the Frey effect, the microwave hearing. Whatever the technology is where stuff can speak to people. It's not schizophrenia, it's not demons, it's not that. It was very clear-cut human male voice. Sounded like a guy that I would say was late 20s to early 30s, approximately. Sounded like a white guy's voice. Was suddenly in my head, commanding me, look at the license plate. And it kind of stopped me a little bit. So I paused, like, huh? Like, and whatever, shook my head, started to keep going, and said it more forcefully, look at the license plate. And I paused and stopped, and I kind of started to lower the bag, like, okay. And then I was like, no, I'm not what? So I'm like arguing against this urge and this voice, like, because it doesn't make sense to me what's happening. So I turned to keep going, and now the third time it's like screaming at me, look at the license plate. Just, and I was like, oh my God, okay. So I turned around and I go back over to the car with the trailer hitch sticking out, and I kind of squat down next to it, and I'm looking at the license plate, and I'm trying to see, what am I supposed to see here? And I'm looking at it, and it's a Michigan plate. Okay. And I'm looking at the letters, I'm looking at the numbers. Nothing about it is making sense to me. It doesn't mean anything. Michigan, the letters, I don't get it. And then I suddenly noticed the license plate frame. So the frame, it was like a chrome frame, and it just simply said Joseph. So I just kind of was like, okay, yeah. And then I just got my trash bag and continued to the dumpster. Like, all right, I get it. You're mad. I get it. I was just sitting there thinking about, I'm so glad I didn't bring Joe to Florida. I'm so glad I left him behind. I'm so glad he's out of my life, and I forgot to mention the trailer hitch. Okay. When I was thinking all those thoughts, the original plan was that I was going to get a hitch for my car and get a trailer for his stuff. So totally forgot to mention that. That's why it's so important about the trailer hitch. And I was thinking, I'm so glad I didn't do that. It's not even just that I'm glad, I didn't bring Joe. I was specifically thinking, I'm glad I didn't get the hitch and the trailer and I don't even know if my little Mazda could have handled that type of weight and trying to get up and over the mountains back from Oregon into California. I don't even know if my car could have done it. So I was just so glad I didn't do any of it, blah, blah, blah. So then I get injured, banged by a trailer hitch with the license plate saying Joseph. So it's almost like retaliation, and them kind of making it known that, yeah, they're very displeased at what was happening here. So I've mentioned several times in my writings or in interviews that I went off script. And these are the proofs that I have for the fact I was going off script, and it didn't end there. So this realm breach and stuff making itself overtly known in my reality and, the full disclosure thing, this is where it all was continuing, with a vengeance, was when I first got to Fort Lauderdale, the whole 2002, 2003 time period. So stuff like that where, we've got the voices in the head and the synchronous happenings. And that in itself is, like I say in my book, mind-blowing. I don't understand how something like that could happen. It is almost like the Matrix, How do you create a situation with a vehicle that has a trailer hitch, and how do they get me to ram my leg into it by accident and have a license plate frame that says Joseph? How do you get that to happen? I mean, I don't expect you to answer it, but
Yeah, well, the gangstalkers would think that, the gangstalking targeted individual community would say it's just people being hired to, all right, you get the car or the van, and we'll make a special license plate frame for it. You park it right there,
Somehow we'll get her to bang her leg in. I mean, how? And then have voices in her head. What?
I mean, that's an artificial synchronicity.
It is, but it's so artificial. It's like a glitch in the Matrix almost. It's like, this can't be happening.
Yeah, I do think that they have limited ability to patch things into the timeline.
Yeah.
Or like, it's like a hacker inserting a little script on a website that no one notices. It doesn't screw with most of the website, but it's just a little bit of code that it can put in there, and that's allowed. Yeah. So they can do that somehow.
Yeah, I mean, and going, like, just really quick on a flashback side note, like, when I was in Portland and I was deliberating whether or not I was going to stay and just stay in Portland, and I was at a temp job at Blue Cross Blue Shield in downtown Portland, and I was, like, debating if I should try to apply for that job permanently. I was told, hey, you should, we really like you. You could work here permanently. So I was deliberating. I even went and got an application from HR to do that. And, I was in an elevator going back to where my office was located with the application in my hand, deliberating, oh, should I fill this out? And then I was even thinking, what am I doing? I was supposed to go to Florida, like, not stay in Portland. Why am I thinking I should do this? So again, in programming and trying to get me to just do what they wanted me to do. But as I, was standing in the elevator with this application, deliberating, should I fill it out? Should I not fill it out? What am I doing? I thought I was going to Florida. Like, the elevator stopped and the doors open to let somebody out. And right when that happened, I talk about this also in Chasing Phantoms. It's the pen from nowhere incident. So all of a sudden, there was this silver cross brand pen that came flying across the elevator floor from nowhere, from the back corner. And it kind of was flying across the floor, spinning, and then came to a rest right at my feet. And I looked down at this pen as I was holding the application, thinking, should I fill this out or not? And I bent down and picked up the pen and was looking at it. And it was a lady across from me in the elevator, a woman, she looked like she was in her 30s, who was looking at the back of the elevator and looking at the pen in my hand and was like, her eyes were huge, and she was like wondering, what the hell was that? Like, where'd that come from? And then she's the one who even said, it's the pen from nowhere. But she was seriously weirded out. She wasn't like kidding around thinking it was funny. Like, so it's not just my imagination that this pen seemed to just appear out of nowhere. She said it, and she was truly weirded out by it. Like, where did that pen come from? How did that just happen? And the type of pen it was, by the way, was the type of pen my dad loved when I was a kid. He always had cross-brand pens. It's just a weird coincidence, but so that was another thing where it indicates, yes, definitely something wanted me to stay in Portland, and I was going off script, and if I was going to go to Florida, then it wanted me to bring Joe, and I did not.
Yeah, and that was an artificial synchronicity because it was garish, there's nothing subtle about it.
Yeah.
There was no real respecting of free will. It's more like, here's a pen out of nowhere.
Oh, should you fill that out? Yes, you should. Here is a pen,
Yeah.
It's throwing it at me.
Yeah, exactly.
So that's, how I know without any doubt that, yes, I was going off script and stuff was not happy. In addition to the programming I could feel that I had to wrestle with and try to override. So yeah, the license plate incident, and that happened. And then this is after you joined me in Florida. So it was later in the year. And again, this anecdote is also in Chasing Phantoms, but I had requested in my mind that I want to see them, like, in public. I want to see them, and I want to know it's them. Like, I want to see these guys. Like, I'm tired of hearing about them and them being invisible and I never see them. I want to see them. So I had that very specific desire and thought that I put out there. And then it seemed to happen. So as when you were with me, we went, the Denny's, the infamous Denny's on Commercial Boulevard incident. Or was it Oakland Park? I think it was Commercial. So there's a Denny's on Commercial Boulevard and Federal Highway in Fort Lauderdale. But the thing is, we didn't start out at that Denny's. This is another one of those impossible things. Like, what the hell? We went to a different Denny's in a different part of Fort Lauderdale. And we remember when we got there and the place was dead. There was like nobody there. And then our server went to go get our drinks and she was like coughing and hacking in the server station. Like she had a cold and it was really disgusting. And I'm like, ugh, we should just go. Like, I don't want to go to this Denny's. So we just got up and bailed out and we went to a different Denny's. So we went to this other one on Commercial Boulevard. And that one was really happening. Tons of people, and didn't have like Typhoid Mary as a waitress. So I'm like, yeah, this is great. So we got our booth, and then we're chatting, and then all of a sudden I had the psychic nudge. I could feel it telepathically to look up, and I looked up, and there was these two suits that were coming down the aisle. And keep in mind, this is 1 a.m. I didn't mention that part. This was late at night, 1 in the freaking morning, okay? And there was these two out of place suits at 1 a.m. at a Denny's diner coming down the aisle, and they're both staring me down. And you weren't facing them, I was. So I'm looking right at them. And again, it was a telepathic nudge. So I'm looking at the two guys, and I actually recognized one of them subconsciously. Like, I couldn't consciously tell you. There's no conscious memory of him, but I knew him. So the second I looked at him, I knew him. There was recognition. And he was the one staring me down with kind of like a sexual smirk. And he was shorter of the two guys. He was probably about 5'8" or 5'9". He kind of had like a darker complexion, heavier facial features, like with a slightly heavier brow bone and a bigger nose than the other guy. The other guy was like a white guy who was at least over 6 feet tall, with more refined features, just thinning bald hair, just like a plain white guy looking guy. And the shorter guy had the dress white shirt with the tie, the gray, it was a white shirt, the tie, the gray slacks, the belt, and the nice shoes. The other guy had the full suit jacket as well. And I did not recognize the taller guy. I knew the shorter guy who was staring me down with the smirk. So right when they passed by both of us, I'm looking at them. I'm like frozen in place. I feel like a small child who's in trouble. So the only thought that was going through my head, like I'm frozen, I'm like scared. I recognize the guy, and the only thought going through my head is, uh-oh. Like I'm in trouble, and I'm not doing what I'm supposed to be doing. That was the thought going through my head. And the taller guy who I did not recognize, he was staring me down with contempt. Like, he frowning, but also curious. So there was a mix of curious but disdainful as he's looking at me. So I could tell, I don't know him, but this is also the first time he's seeing me as well. So we're seeing each other for the first time. The other guy, though, he knows me. And neither one of them are happy with what's happening here. And then they stopped at the booth behind me and you. And now I was just frozen in place. I couldn't even turn and look at them. I'm just frozen, just staring at the table. I can't move. I know I'm in trouble. And then what did you say? Did they lit a cigarette or something? Because I didn't see the rest of what happened because I couldn't even turn around. But you said to me, why, what the hell are those guys staring at you like that for? Like, you noticed the way they were looking at me. Like, something's really weird here.
Yeah, they themselves looked out of place.
Oh, yeah.
I mean, the vibe that they gave off was like, you'd imagine like FBI or mafia, something of that level.
Yes, like power. And then you said the shorter guy, the one I recognized, you said he lit a cigarette. Mm-hmm. And you said the way that his mannerisms were, it was like mafia, you said. It was like pure power. It was like, this guy's just very confident.
Yeah, not like lower mafia, but like upper.
Yeah. Not the thuggish meatballs, like the dumb thugs. Right. This was like high level. Especially with the way they're dressed. So then you said then they moved further back to another booth. Mm-hmm. And I never looked back the entire time. I was just frozen in place. I felt like I was in trouble. I was doing something wrong. And I couldn't even tell you what was going on. So we didn't talk about it at the time. You said, what the hell? Like, why are those guys looking at you like that? And I couldn't even talk. So I never answered you, I'm just like staring at the table like, uh-oh, And then I guess apparently the shorter guy that I recognized, he had gone back up front, which I did not see, and came back around for a second buzz by, and I felt it again. So I had been looking at you, and all of a sudden my eyes in my head turned, just drawn to look over there, and he was locking his eyes on me as he was walking towards me again with that smirk. So he did a second like buzz by just to make a point, and stare me down as he walked by me again. And so anyway, I had requested to see them in public and to know it was them. Well, I think, you can't get any more obvious than that anecdote. Like, two guys in suits at a Denny's at 1 a.m. is, And I
Yeah.
recognize one of them, and they're staring me down, and the one guy seems to hate me. So it's
Yeah, I mean, when you request it, that's like even more than just saying yes.
it's beyond saying yes. It's like you are inviting it in at that point. Like you're really dancing with the devil. But I don't regret doing that at all. I don't. I wanted to see them. I wanted to know. I was tired of hearing about these invisible thems, you know. I mean, like, really, I want to see them. Show yourself, you know. It's like, okay. So I got that wish, and you were a witness to it. So that was the second thing that also, that uh-oh feeling that permeated the entire incident is, again, showing that I was going off script. I was not doing what I was supposed to do, which was going to Florida without Joe and then connecting with you and setting that timeline into motion. They did not want that. So that was another thing that started like this overt revealing of itself once I got to Fort Lauderdale. And then right after that, like the black heli harassment started, and you were witness to the very first incident that ever happened. You were there in the apartment with me. It was 7 a.m. We woke up to a intensely loud military helicopter that was hovering outside our apartment. And again, 7 a.m. It's bright and sunny, blue sky. And as soon as I opened my eyes, keep in mind, we'd never had a helicopter harassment ever. Me or you had never experienced such a thing. And as soon as I woke up and heard what was happening outside, I immediately knew what was happening, that it was them and it's for me. Like, how would I know such a thing? I don't know, but I knew. And so I got up immediately, is kind of scared. It's almost like in Close Encounters of the Third Kind, where they're opening the door and the aliens are outside, you know. But I opened it, and instead it's a sunny, blue-skied, beautiful Florida morning with palm trees and everything. It looks really innocuous and pretty, except there was a gigantic matte black, like with blacked out windows, helicopter hovering right over the leasing building, which is directly across the little garden from our apartment. So it's right there, and it was pointed straight at my front door. And when we looked at the helicopter bodies online to see which helicopter matches, you said it matched the Comanche. So,
right, the Comanche, which never actually officially went into production.
Yeah, it's
They
weird.
only had like 11 prototypes or something like that, and then they canceled it. So it's not supposed to be out there.
Yes, but you said that was the closest one, like that fit. Like I drew, like that was the other thing, is like you wanted to get up and look, and I was so scared. I was like, no. I don't want you to get involved. This isn't about you. This is about me. They're here for me. You know, they were there to intimidate and make themselves known and to like just intimidate me. Basically, they're yelling at me. That's what's happening when they're hovering and pointing at you. It's them yelling at you, basically.
Like how many yards would you say it was above or from you?
Well, it's like, you remember the garden
Yeah.
that was right outside our, like there's these two buildings close together that are, you know, is the garden in between. So it was right there, like right. I don't know, how many yards would you say it was?
Like 50 yards?
No, not even that far. The building was just right there across the garden, and it was right over that building. So, and it was pointed right at my, so it was massively loud, so insanely loud. And that's what was crazy about this incident, was like, it's 7 a.m. in urban Fort Lauderdale, in the middle of, we're right off Broward Boulevard next to the 95. And there is this Comanche matte black helicopter making a humongous ruckus, and nobody came out of their apartments. Not a single other person was around in this incident to see it. You could hear it inside, but I didn't even want you to get up and come and show yourself, because I just felt that was dangerous. It's not about you. Like, don't worry, it's about me. I don't want to get you involved in this. I was just like scared for your protection. Like, crazy reaction, but I didn't want you to even show yourself. Like, you know what I mean? So, but you could hear it, and it was so insanely loud, and not a single person came out. Not one. But that, and I was scared, you know, because I didn't know any better. I never had something like that happen before. It was just very scary, you know, very alarming. And I knew it was about me, and the way it was pointed out my door. And then it didn't go away until after I got up, opened the door, showed myself, knew it was them, knew what was going on, acknowledged it, and went back inside, and then it went away. But that wasn't the end of it. So that started a pattern of black heli harassment that started happening, you know, while I was in Fort Lauderdale. So it's harassment, again, indicating not only am I in stuff's radar, but stuff is pissed at me. And it's trying to intimidate me. It's trying to keep me scared, you know. And it was working. I was terrified. So these other black helicopter stuff, it was terrifying. Just never gone through it before. And then other weird things that were happening during this time period as well. It was like all kinds of things that I call in Chasing Phantoms the sidetrack circus diversion, fear and paranoia generators. That's what I call it. It's like cue the circus music, like dun 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 dun, and it's just freaking nonsense that starts happening, just to keep you scared and discombobulated. So like, again, there was the thems in public. Then there was like, at Denny's. And then there was like street theater comments that would be said to me. And this is in classic and gangstalking lore, where you're outside walking around downtown or something and random strangers are yelling out what they call street theater type of things that are very pointed. Like they're looking you right in the eye and yelling at you, saying really weird and pointed things. And sometimes stuff that aligns with whatever you're doing in your life that they wouldn't have any way of knowing about, but somehow they do. And in one of those instances, I was outside of Walgreens on, it was downtown Fort Lauderdale, and some guy, like a skeezy looking guy standing outside with his mustache and smoking, some skinny skeezy looking guy smoking his cigarette with a mustache. He had his friend with him, and he's looking right at me and says really loudly to his friend, looks like we got ourselves another MIA, said it with this southern drawl, looks like we got ourselves another MIA. And he's just staring me down. And I don't even know what that means. I'm like, what does that mean? Looks like we got ourselves another MIA, another missing in action. What are you talking about?
Yeah, well, it kind of makes sense, though, because the thems were angry at you, not going with the program, not going with the script, and kind of leaving.
Oh, you know what? Like, I swear to God, listeners aren't going to believe me. I swear to God, I never thought of it. Thank you. We've never discussed that really, like until this very moment, like in depth. That makes sense.
Yeah, because I don't think I realized it in years past, but
yeah. No, that totally makes sense. Maybe that's what it was. Like, I went AWOL. They should have said, look like we got ourselves another AWOL.
Yeah, right.
But missing in action would fit too, I guess. So
yeah, but by the way, that was the same Walgreens where I had my encounter with the people that couldn't see me. I had that migraine trying to go down the go down the aisle. It was
the same Walgreens where I saw another them.
That's right.
That was a happening Walgreens. Yeah. So yeah, there was that, and then there was an incident where, oh my God, yeah, stuff had apparently broken into my apartment while I was at work, and did stuff so that I would know it had been in my apartment. But I got home, it was August in South Florida, mind you, so it means I always had the AC on, especially for Kitty. So I'd leave the AC on for her all day, so she could be comfortable, and I always left it at a certain temperature. I think I always put it at 72, 3 or 4. I can't even remember at this point what I would leave it on. But I came home, and then I would close the bathroom door. So I didn't want to waste AC on the bathroom. So I'd keep the bathroom door closed, but then, leave it on for Kitty. And then I came home one day from work, and I immediately noticed the bathroom door was open. And I know I had closed it before I went to work. I mean, I knew for a fact. Not only that, but my living room windows were open. I would never open my living room windows. So the windows had been opened. The bathroom door was open, so letting all the AC out, that was like the first thing. And it knew I would notice that because I was very mindful about that. And then I went to the AC thermostat, and it had been moved to 69. So I would never put it that low. I mean, I want to help Kitty, but she doesn't need it on 69. It's too low. So that's how I knew for sure. Like if I'm imagining that, oh, maybe I just was forgetful and I left the bathroom door open and I was like out of my head and opened the living room windows in the middle of the summer, then there was no doubt when I saw the thermostat, no, someone has been in your apartment and they were moving things around. And so there was that kind of stuff, like stuff coming in while I was at work making sure I knew that it had been there. Then there the weird voicemails that were happening when pretty much nobody even had my phone number. So in one instance, it was the sound of marching jackboots on my cell phone voicemail. Another one, it was just a little snippet of a guy with a southern drawl, which I talked about in Chasing Phantoms, saying, this is how he said it. He goes, hearts and lungs and, hello? Limbs and things. So it was this creepy message. That's what it said. Like, it's talking about body organs and limbs. And in the middle of it going, hello? hearts and lungs and hello and limbs and things. It was just, that was it. That was the message. And I'm just like, what? So at the time, it made no sense. Now, all these years later, we know about things like human trafficking and organ harvesting and things. And of course, it makes total sense in relation to that. But at the time, I had no idea about that. And I was like, I don't know what this, it's creepy, obviously, but I don't know what he's talking about or why, and why this is on my voicemail. So I would get those kind of voicemails and stuff, both on my home landline voicemail and my cell phone. When again, nobody even had my phone number. But again, this is like what I call the sidetrack, circus, diversion, fear, and paranoia generators. And it ultimately, the reason I'm getting into all of this is because it was deliberate and it was by design. It was all about trying to keep me in the fear frequency, because they can control you when you're scared and you're weak and you're helpless and you're disempowered. If you think you're a victim and that they are all powerful and you're dealing with gods and you are nothing and you're scared, they got you. And you're also distracted and you're going to be derailed from your bigger life purpose. You won't fulfill anything you came here to do if you're terrified, and are constantly dealing with, all this crap coming at you from black hellies and thems and stuff in your apartment and creepy voicemails and street theater. Every time you go anywhere, you got strangers saying weird things to you. So, and it works for a lot of people, unfortunately. And that's why I wrote my Gangstalking article, because I wanted to help people, because it is such a big, huge problem that's happening in this world, the targeting and the Gangstalking, and people being disempowered by it. And I'm trying to help combat that and teach people based on my own experiences of what I went through and what I learned from it. You can combat this stuff and you can get it to stop mostly. You can eliminate over 90% of this. But, me getting from where I was full of fear and disempowered, terrified, to where I am now, which is it doesn't even faze me at all. And in fact, I just laugh at it. It has zero effect on me. I mean, I mean that sincerely. You know that. It's just nothing. That change didn't happen overnight. Well, actually, it did. It was the message I got from my higher self. So I had this thing where I was trying to connect with my higher self over a 2-week period. Every night when I was trying to fall asleep, I would be trying to intend to connect to my higher self. And I did this every single night for 2 weeks straight. And even though nothing was happening, I just kept doing it and doing it and doing it. And I want to talk to my higher self. I want to connect to the higher positive good stuff that's, I knew was there. And it full 2 weeks of hammering away at it. And then finally, after 2 weeks, one night, it actually started to happen. I slipped into a connection with my higher self. We were having this exchange, a 2-way exchange. And it was amazing. But in the middle of that happening, all of a sudden, out of nowhere, this car pulls up right outside my apartment, parked in the spot right outside my living room window. And it's, in the middle of the night, it was 2 a.m., 1 a.m., 2 a.m. And it's like they came home from the club or something, and they got the music pounding the bass, as it pulls up, really super loud, tons of people coming out of the car, the doors slamming, voices yelling, the music's just cranked. Again, at 2 a.m. And this had never happened before. This is not normal at all to be happening. Even in Fort Lauderdale, this wasn't normal. So I could feel the connection with my higher self was breaking apart because of this sudden, loud, abrasive distraction that was happening only feet away from me on the other side of the window. Because it was a studio apartment, so my bed was in the same room as the living room. So there, the connection's breaking apart. And I even asked my higher self, is this interference, and it came back, yes. I go, is it from them? And it was yes, so I got that. And then I was asking, since I still had this connection, a very important question that was on my mind about all the stuff that had been happening, everything I was just outlining, all these circus diversion things that had been going on for months. I asked if they, were behind all of this stuff, even the stuff that maybe didn't seem like it would be, like the voicemails and the street theater and whatnot. And the answer was yes. And then it elaborated, it's to keep you scared all the time. It was to keep me in a fear frequency, to keep you scared all the time. And it was like a revelation to get this confirmation from something higher. And to know I'm not imagining this stuff. It is real and it is them, and it's just to scare you. And just knowing that, hearing that, and immediately just took away all the power. Like, I don't know. It just immediately, it's like, I can no longer be scared of this, knowing that it's just a bunch of men behind the curtain, so to speak, pulling a bunch of strings just to scare me. Like I'm a child. So it just kind of evaporated, like all the fear, everything overnight.
Yeah, well, like back in 2000, 2001, when I first started really researching the Matrix control system and connecting with people, just different researchers talking on the phone. Yeah, I got a lot of interference on the phone too at the time, like noises and beeps and hisses and volume changes. There's really, really obvious stuff. But I think I might have mentioned this earlier in the show, but I figured out that it was all a psychological bluff, because if they're monitoring, they don't need to let you know they're monitoring.
Right.
If that's what they're interested in to monitor. I mean,
if they're really trying to actually monitor you, they will be discreet. It's stealth. Mm-hmm. But if they want you to know, they'll let you know.
Yeah, and why do they want you to know? Unless it's to get you to change your behavior.
Yeah.
To shoot yourself in the foot, to stop communicating or talk in code, get all paranoid and scared. So it's a psychological operation.
Yes, I was thinking earlier, psyop. It is like a psyop.
But that's just a phone, like once they pull out the black helicopters and street theater and weird messages now, that's something entirely else.
You shrink into a little ball. You just get smaller and smaller, terrified and disempowered. And absolutely. And that was what was happening to me. It was going in that direction. I was just scared all the time. And then all of a sudden to know this is all just deliberate. This is just a game that they're playing, Yeah. It just evaporated. Like it overnight, like from 1 minute to the next.
Yeah. Now there was another time where you had a black helicopter or some sort of a helicopter incident, and something told you to treat it like a entity attack.
Yeah, and I'm trying to remember now. This is crazy. Did that happen before or after this revelation? I can't remember now. This is crazy. This is crazy.
But you remember the actual incident?
Okay, right? Of course. I've talked about it 100 times. It's in my book. It's a very important incident. It was you were back in Iowa at the point that this happened. So you weren't there, and I just remember I was getting ready for work and and all of a sudden I hear a helicopter again. But this time it was in the back of my apartment, pointed at the back door, because I had a front door and a back door, and I knew exactly what this was, because it was really, really low, it was really, really loud, and it was just going and going and going and going, like it was hovering. So I already knew, oh great, it's one of these again. So I went out the back door to go look at it, and again, another beautiful bright blue sky day. It was gorgeous, and there's this all black helicopter, a totally different type of helicopter. It wasn't like a big Comanche style military. It was more of a regular style black helicopter, but the windows were blacked out. The whole thing was solid black, and it was hovering, pointed at my back door, and it was just going and going and going and going and going. And this time, however, there was somebody there, somebody else seeing it. It wasn't like that other one where nobody came out of their apartments. And this one was actually about 8 o'clock in the morning. The other one was 7 o'clock. So, and I later figured out the time difference thing. We were in daylight savings at the time that the second one happened. The other one happened, we were out of daylight savings. So it showed me that whatever these things are, they're not going by daylight savings. It may as well have been 7 a.m. still. It was the same exact time. So without daylight savings, it also would have been 7 a.m. So that was just an interesting side note. I had noticed these things aren't doing daylight savings like we are. So, but that aside, there was a black guy who was in the parking lot right there. And he had his hands in his pockets, and he's just staring up at it. And then he sees me come out, and then he's looking at me. He's looking up at the helicopter. He's looking at me. He's looking at the helicopter. Like, what the hell is this? So I'm looking at him, and we're looking at each other. And I was just like, thank God there's somebody else seeing this, so yeah. And then I called you on the phone, like you were in Iowa, and I was like freaking out, like, God, why is this happening? Listen, and you could hear it in the background, this like loud helicopter, and I'm like, So, and I'm like, forget it. I gotta get ready for work. I don't have time for this. I have to keep getting, I haven't even gotten dressed yet. So I got off the phone with you, but you heard it. So I called to tell you it was happening, and you could hear it in the background. And then I was in my kitchen trying to continue to get ready for work, and I'm just freaking out, running loops in my mind. Like, why is this happening to me? I haven't even done anything. I'm innocent. I don't deserve this. Like, why is it happening? And I'm like, I'm seriously having all these freaked out thoughts. And then that's when all of a sudden the higher self kind of cut in on the line. And I think this is after the original higher self communication, because, you know, I think this one happened because I'd established the rapport. You know, it's like you get a channel opened, you get into a groove and you get the channel opened. So so it happened after. So yeah, that proves it right there. And I'm like, I can't believe I can't remember the time frame when things are happening, but it happened after, because I'd already established that, like, back and forth. And then once you do that, it becomes easier and easier. So anyway, it kind of cut in on the line, and it was kind of calm. It was funny. It sounded like me, like a female, but older and more mature and wise. And it was very calm, and it sounded kind of amused. Like, it just found this amusing, but not in a mocking way. It wasn't anything negative or mocking. It was just kind of slightly amused. And it was like, you know, go into the middle of the room, you know, and you know, basically telling me to calm myself down, treat this like you would an entity attack, and watch what happens. So I'm listening to them like, what? Like, what does a helicopter have to do with an entity? Like, I know what I was trying to do when I had entities that would come around, like, harassing me in the middle of the night, which is a whole other thing. It's another part of this thing that was happening in Fort Lauderdale. I had entity, and after the vortex happened, and why I felt like I was tagged, it was like entity encounters were also a new norm in my reality when they had never been prior to the vortex. So it's kind of like, again, a door had been opened. It was like I was tagged. The stuff was now a regular fixture in my reality. So I always had these entities coming around that I felt like I was having a battle to get them, like, you know, trying to find different tactics to get them to leave me alone. So this higher self voice was telling me to use that same tactic that I was using on the entities, but do it on the helicopter. So I was like, it doesn't make sense. Da, da, da. And so it said it again. You just go into the middle of the room, you know, and treat this like you would an entity attack or an entity encounter. So I was like, all right, fine, because it said it twice now. So I went into the middle of the room, kind of stood there, and that's why I've described it in other interviews. It's almost like Neo in the Matrix when he, you know, puts his hand up and stops the bullets, because he becomes full of empowerment, and he knows who he is, and that he, you know, he's in charge of things, and this is a game, it's a joke. And I did the same thing. So it was like I just dropped the fear and became full of this empowerment, and used the same tactics I would on an entity, but I did it towards the helicopter that was, at this point, it had now moved. If I had any doubt that it was about me, no doubt anymore, because it went from being just pointed at my back door to it was straight on top of me. It was hovering over my 1-story apartment, directly on top of me in the living room. So it was quite intimidating, but I had to try to level myself, calm myself down, just follow the instructions. And so I could hear it right over my head, like, just going and going. And then I just leveled myself off, calmed my frequency, kind of like Neo in the Matrix, and just full of my own empowerment, and raised my frequencies, like changing the radio dial to a completely different station. And I just dropped the fear, dropped everything, and I could feel it. Like, I just felt so completely different inside. And immediately the helicopter stopped and it just took off. Boom, gone. So the second I did that, it just stopped and ran away, basically. So I remember I had my eyes closed as I was standing there, and then I opened them, and I was smiling, looking around, yeah, it worked, because it had been going and going and going and going for well over 10 minutes, By the time I finally did that, it had been going. I even talked to you on the phone, and it was still going. And so it was like over 10 minutes of this. And all of a sudden, coincidentally, the second I did this frequency shift, changing the radio dial, it just stopped. So it wasn't a coincidence. And after that, I did that tactic anytime the black helis came around after that. And there was definitely several more. And I talk about it in Chasing Phantoms. I outline every black helicopter instance I had and how each one went and how I handled it. And every time, when I would just, change my frequency, not get scared, and actually treat it like a joke and find it amusing, it stopped, and it would immediately, they would go away because it wasn't working anymore. Whatever they're trying to do, it's not working. So, in fact, the very last one I ever had in life, it was happening while I was getting ready for work, and and it was going and going and going, and even started to follow me. Like, you were there when it happened, because you told me later, after I got in my car, you watched as the helicopter, because I saw it following me, but you even verified you watched it go and follow me as I was going down the street, 18th Street. It was following me all the way until I got to a 4-way stop, and then it stopped and was pointed at me. So it was following me, you know what I mean? And it was waiting for me at the 4-way stop, pointing at me. And I was hanging out in my car laughing. I had my music going. I had a camera. I took a picture of it. And I'm just laughing like, whatever. I just took a picture. And I'm literally having fun with it. It was just funny to me. And continued to work. And that was the last black helicopter that ever happened there. Never had another one again after that. So they learned, like, it's not working anymore. The entity attack stuff that was coming around all the time in Fort Lauderdale, that eventually stopped. There was one in particular that was always coming, and that particular one stopped because it wasn't working anymore. The helicopter stopped.
Which entity was that?
Well, it's the one you nicknamed Ralph, the rustling plastic bag.
All right.
Because I described how it sounded, like what it looked like. It's all black, and it would like be right in my face, and it would shake itself around, and it would make this scary noise that I tried to describe it to you. So you said it kind of sounded like you joked it was like a plastic bag rustling around or something. So Ralph, it was Ralph. Ralph stopped coming around. And the random other ones too, they just stopped, and the black helicopter stopped, and the street theater, that one, I had a moment where I confronted it. It was at, I don't remember, was it the same I think it was the same damn Walgreens, where it was more street theater. Another skinny meth head looking skis bag was there with his friend. It was a different one though, not the same as the one before. And he came, crossed by me in one of the aisles, and he leaned in and said in some skeezy way, I couldn't even understand what he was saying, but he was like being a little chicken shit coward, just leaning in and trying to say something creepy and skeezy to me, which I couldn't even hear what he was saying, but everything about the way he looked and the way his voice was and the way he was behaving, he was just trying to be a little shit basically. And he said whatever he said, and then ran off with his friend. Like, I call it like a drive-by, chicken shit drive-by harassment, like whatever he was doing. And at that point, I was definitely more and more empowered. And I started yelling at him across the Walgreens, like, why are you talking to me? And I was like screaming at him across the wall, like, and he just stopped. And I just kept like, it was like a parent yelling at like an 8-year-old child who was misbehaving. So I felt like this regal queen, or like a parent who's reprimanding a child. Like, I really meant it. Like, how dare you? Like, who do you think you are, basically, was the attitude. And so I just kept saying, why are you speaking to me? Like, and I just like, you being you, why are you talking to me? Like almost kind of like, don't you know who I am? Like, do you even realize who you're talking to? Like, I was just like full of this like empowerment. Maybe it was a little, like, I've joked around, maybe I kind of overshot it into egomania, but like it worked, whatever. I mean, it worked. And I meant it. Like, who do you think you are? You being you, speaking to me. Like you are, don't even look at me. Like, whatever you are, like, and I was just like chewing him out. Like, and everybody was just frozen, like looking at me and him and like, oh my God, what is happening here? And he had nothing to say, of course. These type of cowards never do when you confront him. And that was the last time the street theater thing ever happened. So one by one, I was able to get all this phenomenon to stop by being empowered. Once I was clued into the fear frequency and that they were just trying to keep me scared all the time, and that there really is a man behind the curtain orchestrating this. And it's not legit. It's all manufactured. No matter, even if it seems real, it's not. And got the helis to stop, the entities to stop, the street theater to stop, no more voicemails anymore. All of it stopped, not forever. It's not like I never had any more entities again. But all this overt stuff, like, it went from just full blown to almost more than 90% diminished, and some of it just completely, fully stopped. Like the street theater and the black helis, that was fully stopped. So, yeah, I mean, it's a very real thing, the fear frequency, and it's what it can do to stop this hyperdimensional targeting. But in addition, the physical stuff too. And, an interesting and important point I made in my Gangstalking write-up was this quote, and this is the quote. And I wrote, "One thing I'm convinced of, though, is that when it comes to the non-physical variety of harassment, the tactics / mindset / frequency shifts described in this write-up do work and are something everybody should try. And sometimes, for whatever reason, they can spill over and work against targeting of the true physical-based variety. I don't know why that would be, unless it's because even the, quote, quite obviously physical-based, quote, nonsense happening to people isn't actually what it seems to be." So, yeah. Because again, why would treating a helicopter attack like an entity attack, why would that work? How do the two even correlate, So how do you, and especially like with the street theater stuff and these people that are saying this stuff. So, what what does that say about the people that seem to be following and monitoring and harassing their targets and like gang stalking? Are they fully real is what I'm asking. It's like,
Yeah, is reality fully real?
right. Is any of this really real? Like even the stuff that you think is real. Okay, they're people. They're like me. Are they? Are they people? Are they like you? Those helicopters seem like they were real helicopters until they weren't acting like they were real helicopters. Just saying.
Yeah, well, I think it means that real is really a sliding scale, right? It's not a binary all or nothing. It's like, this is real, this is not real. It's more like this is 80% real, 50% real, 30% real. And ultimately, what do we mean by real? And that's something I'll get into later to kind of conclude this series of discussions that we're having, where I get into the nature of reality and whether we are living in a simulation, which is a pretty popular idea nowadays, or if it's more like the ancient Hindu conception that we're really living inside of a collective dream that's dreamt up by some higher consciousness, some higher universal mind, And ultimately, what I conclude is that it's actually both, but the way the two relate is really, really interesting. But what you're talking about, I mean, that's like ground level in the trenches anecdotes that illustrate how reality can get really strange when your own frequency, your own mindset kind of strays off the main path.
Yes.
Once you get off the highway and you start going into the woods, that's when you get the weird creatures and the magical things,
Yeah.
Yeah. So the way that reality really works, though, it's interesting because, I mean, another phenomenon that ties into the mind-reality feedback loop and targeting and so on, I noticed in myself a long time ago, in the early 2000s, during that general time period, and also with many other people that I've talked to over the years, I noticed that if your mindset, your frequency gets too far off the path, either in the negative direction or in a positive direction, then that in itself causes glitches to happen. And then the way that I reconciled it, it's almost like we are in a matrix, and this matrix is a story generator. It's trying to keep all of our individual storylines interwoven to make like a smooth general plot, like a bigger general plot of a movie or a novel, but we've all got our own storylines. Well, what if in a novel, one of the characters, one of their storylines just goes way off the rails into crazy land, Then the author has to figure out, like, well, shoot, how do I even merge or reconcile the two? And maybe it can't. So now that character will start experiencing things that the other characters can't even perceive or see or experience because it's not part of their storyline. So an example of that in real life would be, let's say you're like a targeted individual, you're out in public, and all of a sudden you notice people watching you and staring you and following you around. Maybe they've got like those black-eyed people that, their eyes are all black, or just one of those weird semi-human things. Now this person can be in a restaurant or in a mall or in a shop. They can be surrounded by these weird things, And yet there's other people there that don't even notice it. They don't notice it's happening. They act like it's normal, you know? So to those people, their storyline is continuing along the mundane path as always. But your own storyline, even though you're exactly like 10 feet away from them, you're experiencing something else. You're experiencing these creatures that are actually there, right? But in your storyline, it fits, but it doesn't fit with theirs. So there's like a discontinuity, there's a break, there's a glitch. And so that can happen, like, then probabilities like that can happen if you stray too far from the main track of probability that everyone else is going along with. Now, here's the thing. I think that negative entities, even Black Ops stuff, the things that are in another realm that want to do a realm breach, I think they can try to use that principle. So maybe that's part of the psyop they're doing, not only to keep you in fear, but to keep your mindset, your emotions, your vibration, get it off the main track, so that you start inviting in improbable experiences, which they can then manifest through, or that they can then start coming through. It's almost like you open a door to the weird, and since they're weird, though, now they can come in. So I think this is weird. I mean, this is a pretty unacknowledged quantum consciousness phenomenon that I think happens in real life, but people don't realize that it's something that can happen. I'm sure if you worked out the physics of this, you could work out the equations of timeline dynamics and consciousness and how that all works, and you could say, oh yeah, well, obviously this equation here shows that you should have something like this happening, and then you can ask all the gang-stalking people and other people like you, and we'd have backup for that actually happening in real life, so I'm sure there's a physics behind it, but at the same time, reality is also very dreamlike too. It's almost like you're in a normal dream and some entity's trying to come around, and maybe if you give into the fear, now all of a sudden your dream turns into a nightmare.
And what ties into this whole thing, the infamous swarm of bees incident that happened in Charlottesville.
All right.
Yeah, which you were there for. So I had been reading Barbara Bartholick's book. She used to work with Jacques Vallée for years as a UFO researcher. And I think it was Peggy Fielding, I guess is her name, wrote Barbara's story into a book. Spoke with Barbara, interviewed Barbara, made a book about everything. And but anyway, I was reading that book, and it was talking about some of the really dark things that had happened to Barbara in terms of harassment and targeting in life because of her involvement in researching aliens and UFOs and stuff, and working with Jacques Vallée, including stuff being done to her family dog, And when I got to that point, I was getting really upset when I was reading it. Like my nerves were frazzled, and I was just really sinking into a bad frequency of fear and just being kind of frazzled reading about it. For hours, and then you got up. You got up because you have an upside down schedule. So it was like 2 PM at that point, and you got up, and so then we were talking, and I was telling you about the book and everything, and then Kitty started meowing like she wants to go outside. So in the middle of all this, Kitty's like, "Let me out! I want to go play," And she's like, "Meow, meow, meow." So normally I would have gotten up to go open the door and let her out, but instead I didn't in this instance. I was sitting at my chair at my computer, talking to you, looking at the cat at the front door, and just feeling like, in retrospect, I realized it was like the hand of God that just comes down and holds you in place. And so I couldn't get up. And I wasn't really questioning it at the time about why I am not getting up to go let Kitty out. I just am not doing it. And I was like, "Oh, yeah, okay, Kitty. Yeah, I'll let you out in a little bit," or whatever I was saying to her, but not doing it and just being held into place. And then kept talking with you and everything's da-da-da. And then within couple minutes of that, of Kitty still being at the door, let me out, and I'm not letting her out, and I'm chatting with you, all of a sudden we started hearing this noise. It's just loud noise. And I was like, "What is that?" Because it sounded like bees to me. And you were like, "I don't know, motorcycles," because we had sometimes these mopeds on the trail in the woods behind our apartment, occasionally. So it was kind of like, it was that loud and a weird buzzing noise. So you were like, "I don't know, like motorcycles," and I'm like, "No, that sounds like bees." So I got up and went over to like the window, and there was that enormous swarm of bees were suddenly outside our apartment window, going all the way up. It was a 3-story building that we were in, and the upstairs apartment had 2 floors, and we were the first floor. And this swarm of bees was right outside our window and spanning 3 stories up. And it was creepy because the bees were trying to get in Like, they were giant bees, like the biggest supposed regular bees I have ever seen. They weren't bumbles, but they were regular, but they were enormous. And they were angry and swarming. And there was like thousands of them. And some of them were like flying around the edge of the window, trying to find a way in. They were like, remember, like they were like poking, like they're exploring, like they're trying to find a way in. And I'm like, oh my God, it was terrifying. The noise that this swarm made, I've never seen in my life to this day, even a swarm of bees like that. And they were angry, they were mad, and they were outside our window and wanting to get in. That's all I can tell you. It was like, it didn't surprise me. I spent hours reading Barbara's book, getting myself worked up, connecting to that whole thing about aliens and abductions and harassment, and the woo in general, and my frequency getting lowered and full of fear, and somehow connecting into something. And they showed up. And what was scary was that they showed up just before, like right after, Kitty wanted to go outside. And normally I would have let her outside without thinking, oh yeah, absolutely, Kitty, here you go. And that the place where these bees was the spot where Kitty liked to go nibble on grass. It was one of the spots she would go to. And it was just so terrifying to think I was about to let her outside. She would have been in the middle of that swarm of bees. And of course, me being me, would have jumped in to get her out. And it's just unbelievable. But it was like that hand of God, higher stuff, literally just held me in place. So I was unable to get out of my chair. And I just sat there for 5 minutes, not doing anything, and just feeling like I was in a relaxed, almost passive daze, like my head was leaning back and I'm like, okay, Kitty, it was a weird thing. And anyway, so then I ran around closing all the windows. Luckily we had screens, but like I'm not going to take a risk. So I was like closing all the windows, and the swarm is just going and going and going. And you actually got video of it, although it was our old video digital camera that didn't have audio, unfortunately, but you can at least see the video. And I posted a link to it in my book. But you can see the bees and how big they were. And they were just not going away. It was going and going and going. And I was just getting really worked up with fear. And then I realized, in the same way I treated the black hellies like an entity attack, treat the swarm of bees like I did the black hellies. So I was like, enough of this. After like literally like 10 minutes of this swarm just going and going and going and not stopping, I went into the bathroom, removed myself from the situation, closed the door, and did the same thing I did with the helicopters. Closed my eyes and just changed the radio dial. I don't know what's happening here, but it is stopping. This is stopping. Get out of my reality. And I just empowered myself, switched the dial, shot my frequency straight up, all fear gone, totally empowered. And it went away. And immediately, and I came back out of the bathroom. I could tell that was all I needed to do. I could tell that's enough. Went out, and they were already dispersing. And within a minute of me coming out of the bathroom, they were all gone. Even the little stragglers, they completely gone, like it had never happened. But up until I did that, it was going and going and going with no end in sight. So again, is it a coincidence or no? No, I don't think it was a coincidence, And I later found out from Barbara, I actually was in communication with Barbara at that time. And I told her about this incident, and on the phone we were talking, and she told me that it was something that she had encountered in her alien and UFO abduction research that she had not made public. But it's the swarm of bees, the angry swarm of bees that will show up outside the house or residence of targets and abductees to, just, I don't know, intimidate them, scare them. Just be this scary, threatening thing that's happening in their reality that's very unnatural. And it's funny, it happened when I was reading her book. So, and she knew about that phenomenon, but she hadn't published it. She said she hadn't talked about it. So, but it's, again, is this real or is it not real? Like, what is happening here?
Yeah, I mean, we got it on video.
We got it on video. These are real bees, and we even got a video of it. But it's not real. It's not real. Not in the way we think it is.
Yeah.
And there was intervention, so there's a multi-layers happening here. I had positive intervention to make sure I did not let Kitty outside because it knew what was about to happen. It knew it was coming. So it,
Yeah, well, it's interesting that the intervention couldn't keep the bees from happening in the first place.
No, because that As long as we were inside, we're good. And,
Right.
and it probably knew I was going to handle it. Like, she'll handle it. And it'll be yet another interesting learning experience to help bolster her case about these sorts of things. So it'll work in her favor. Let it happen. You know, the only thing we got to do is just make sure she doesn't go outside or let Kitty outside. That's all we got to do on our end, you know.
Yeah, and the frequency and mindset shift that you did to make the bees go away. I mean, that's like the core lesson.
Yeah.
Going back to the black helicopters and pretty much everything else. But that's a lesson that you really, I mean, you can't really discover that and experience it without having to go through the dark stuff first.
Yeah. As long as you can make it on the other side and you're fine, then it's like, we can laugh about it now. You know, it's all good. But, you know, so yeah, it was another worthwhile experience. You know, I would never regret that something let me go through it because I was fine. Kitty's fine. As long as we got, you know, held in place so we didn't go outside, we were all good. And the rest worked itself out, which I think it wanted me to have that experience, you know.
Yeah, another example of the gamble principle. I mean, that's one of the key takeaways from your book, like one of the core lessons.
That is
of
the
Chasing
number
Phantoms.
one. Yeah. That's why there was so much interference, and there's been interference to keep people from reading it, and you know, all kinds of stuff. Endless stories about that I've heard from people over the years telling me.
Right. And so why is it that these negative forces, are so anti that kind of knowledge being put out there?
Because it takes away all their power. The game's up. If we know that they're not all powerful, that there's a man behind the curtain, and that we are more powerful than they want us to, the game over in a lot of ways. It can be applied to so many things in this reality.
Exactly.
And I've shown multiple examples now of how I applied it. You know, entities and helicopters and even swarms of bees and you know, empowering myself against street theater haranguers. It's like, and it had the same effect on all of it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, the same lesson over and over.
And they don't want you to know that. And they are successful in many instances. That's why there is such a rampant problem with targeted individuals and gangstalking victims, because they don't know this. They haven't learned it. They don't know it. And so they're allowing it to have its way with them. And they're just full of fear, paranoia, and it ruins their life. Mm-hmm. And that's why I was trying with my book and with my articles to reach as many people as possible, to tell them what I've gone through and that this works, you know, and you got to do it for yourself and watch what happens.
Yeah, because you're presenting a core solution that kind of strikes at the root of you know, of the entire problem. Because the thing is, you know, if you're a target, like a regular targeted individual, and you've got gang stalking going on, or you're dealing with black helicopters or aliens or whatever, I mean, if you go the route of activism, writing your legislator, you know, trying to get targeted individual phenomena to stop, which I get emails from time to time for people sending out mass emails because they're targeted individuals.
Well, yeah, and they're actually a lot of times talking about the high level frequency beaming type of stuff, and they're not even talking about this type of stuff. They're talking about when they're getting stuff beamed at their heads.
Yeah, and that happens for sure.
Absolutely, and that's a whole other thing, although there's things you can do to block it and stop it for sure.
Yeah, I mean, there's an overlap between the two, but
yeah,
I'm sure that if you had continued down the paranoia path with the black helicopters and not gotten your power back, if you got increasingly scared.
Right. How much worse would it have gotten? Would it have gotten to that level?
Probably.
Where now I've given, you know, I've not only not said no, but in some ways I actually invited some stuff in and just left the door wide open.
Yeah.
And now they can just go full bore. And how much worse would it have gotten?
Well, see, during the time period, we did get some electromagnetic targeting.
Yeah, we did. Actually, yes, exactly.
And we did, because I got my little meter. I was able to measure what window is coming through. Because all you have to do is you have to hold up the meter, put a metal pan in front of it, and if it blocks it, then you know that that's the direction that the beam's coming from. So I could tell what window is coming through. And then so I put up the Mylar camping space blanket over it and grounded it, which kind of reflects and absorbs the energy. Yeah. So I blocked it, right? And it was only like a week later that it started coming in through a different window.
Right, yeah.
And then we blocked that. Another window blocked that. The door would block that.
Yeah, so by the end, I had 2 full walls, including the front door, completely covered in Mylar. And it's like, you know, this is not my ideal decorating style, but we had no choice. It was that bad. So, like, I mean, I can verify. I mean, electronic frequency harassment is a very real thing. These people are not lying when they say they have this happening to them. We experienced it. We had your meter that verified it was happening.
You could feel it in your head when you pull it on.
That's what I mean. Like, I'm like, for instance, I don't suffer from headaches. I'm not someone who gets headaches. And when this was happening, I was plagued with headaches. It makes your head feel like it's pressurized and it hurts. I also am not someone who suffers from nightmares. I love sleep. I sleep very well, very deeply, and it's positive and it's nice. But I was now plagued with like bad dreams and restless, uneasy sleep. So I couldn't have a good, solid sleep. There's like bad dreams and headaches, and then your brain, you just feel scrambled. Like you can't think clearly. Like your brain is just getting fried. There's just all these physical things that you can physically feel happening to you. And yeah, and you had some of those same symptoms. And
Yeah, like when we put up that foil over the windows.
which again is electrically grounded. It's not even just that you're putting up foil, but it's electrically grounded foil.
Yeah, meaning you take a cable, you clip it onto it, and then you plug the other end into the ground hole of your electrical outlet.
Yeah, they use the alligator clips and stuff.
So it just kind of channels the energy down into there.
Right.
But yeah, if you do that, and then you take a corner of the foil and you kind of pull it down so that the window is now exposed and aimed at your head, you can feel it immediately in your temples, the pressure.
Yeah, it's scary. It's and then you had I don't even remember if we talked, because it's been months since we last were talking for this thing. So I don't even remember. Did you talk about in the previous thing about where you got triangulated in your own apartment?
I don't know, but just real quick, I'll summarize it.
Yeah.
I was in my apartment and I had my meter. I was sitting on the floor, and I noticed that wherever I sat, within a couple seconds, the meter would start going off like really intensely. Like there was a very intense electromagnetic beam being put on me. But it's a triangulation, because to get like a circular spot, you have to have at least 2 or 3 beams converging on the same spot. And most likely they were coming from like police radio towers or cell phone towers that are, within line of sight of the window in the apartment. And then I decided, okay, well, what if I just lay down between the fridge and the stove on the floor in order to use those as metal shields and use the floor itself as ground, so like, the thing can't get at me. And sure enough, nothing happened because I was between these shielded objects. But then I noticed that when I got up, there was nothing in my apartment at all, like in terms of frequencies, for at least 20 minutes.
Like it stopped because it was like, oh, he's not there anymore.
Yeah, it thought that I had left my apartment. It must have thought I had left my apartment, and it must have gone on like a wide search pattern around it. But then 20 minutes later, it came back.
Yeah.
It's like it figured out that I was still in there. Even back then, in the news articles, they were talking about this technology called CellDAR, where they use cell phone towers as a form of radar. It literally sends beams into an apartment, and anyone that's in there that's moving around, they can image it using the reflected signals from these cell signals. So they had that technology admitted publicly there, but
that was like 20 years ago.
Yeah, that was like 2002. That's when they had that. So nowadays with 5G and these higher frequencies, I'm sure they have way more sophisticated forms of targeting.
Yeah.
Yeah. So there's definitely a physical component to it. And it brings into question like how much of this targeting phenomenon is, how much of this is just a product of our own mindset, our own frequency, our own vibe, and how much of it is an independent form of negative entity or negative forces attacking you.
Right.
Right.
Yeah.
Because like the New Age would say that there is no real thing as negativity, but if you imagine that there is, then you manifest it. So if you don't think about negativity, it won't come into your life. It doesn't even exist. And it doesn't exist in my reality, because I'm in denial of it. But obviously that's not entirely the truth. Now, the thing that you discovered with the frequency shift, that shows that there is some truth to that, but it's not, but the way that the New Age always portrays things in this twisted, distorted way. It's always a half-truth. Mm-hmm. But the fact of the matter is, of course, there are actual negative entities that hate the light, they hate the spirit, they hate people disseminating knowledge that can ruin their game, the racket that they have going. So these negs, they always want to attack, regardless of your mindset, regardless of who you are. They always want to stamp out what they see as fires, snuff out the light in you. And they do it when they can. It's just a question of whether they can or not. Now, of course, if your vibes are really low, if you're in a very weakened, disempowered, paranoid mindset, then they can attack way easier, because then it's way easier for them to breach your realm due to a commonality of frequency between what they are and what you are. And it's not just that, okay, they're predators, so therefore you're a predator, and that's why they can come into your reality. No, it's not like that. It's like they're predator, you're prey, but there are two sides of the same coin. So they're both on the same like spectrum in a way. And that's why the more of a victim you are in your mindset, in your emotions, in your thoughts and feelings, and your assumptions about reality and who you are and your place in it, the more you have that victim mentality, the more it attracts predators like sharks to blood, and the more it manifests them into your life. And that's why the most important thing you can do is pump yourself up with a sense of empowerment, right? Because it's not just positive emotion in the generic sense, like, oh, I'm going to be happy today, or I'm going to be grateful for my life. Like, yes, that's good, but if you're going up against negative forces, you have to have this sense of empowerment.
Yeah. Like what I was trying to describe in those situations, like when I was shifting the radio dial, it's not just like niceness and now I'm grateful. No, I had to get empowered. And in one case, I had to go almost like full-blown egomania.
Right.
But it worked. So.
Right. And the positive energy, it can help a lot of times, like especially when you're dealing with demons, which are like they're made of energy that is a polar opposite of what positive energy is. So of course, if you're dealing with a demon and you send it love or some sort of a peaceful energy, it's going to hate that. It's going to probably run away or be discombobulated by it. But other times with people, when they're dealing with negative things, if they send it niceness, or they try to be kind to it, like maybe if I'm nice to it and think good thoughts about it, then it'll leave me alone. It turns out it actually doesn't work because the entity is more of a bully entity. And the only thing that it understands, if you, instead of being just nice, what if you are powerful?
Yeah, you're saying no and you're rising up. You got to rise up.
Yeah. Now, I've dealt with entities during my dreams. Well, not just dreams, but in astral projected states. I think I might have mentioned how a negative entity was harassing the members of my Noble Realms forum back in 2004 through 2008. It was going from person to person on the forum and kind of making them feel really icky, like they didn't want to participate and just kind of feel crappy about life. So one day I was astral projecting spontaneously, because I don't do it on purpose because it's kind of dangerous. But I was doing it spontaneously, and I decided to focus in on that entity, and I was able to find it somehow in the astral just by thinking about it and focusing on it. So I honed in on it, and it was like a human-sized electric eel kind of a thing, like a figure, like a vertical electric eel. And I decided to attack it. And the way I did it was by wrapping my entire being around it, almost like a boa constrictor or like a white blood cell enveloping a bacteria. All right, and I did that, and as I held onto it, I would pump my own vibes up as high as I possibly could. It was almost like a He-Man moment vibrationally. And the stronger I became, the weaker it became. And so the only thing it could really do is to thrash around and send these electrical pulses through me, to try to zap me etherically. So I did that for like a couple minutes until it just shrunk down and became weakened and limp, and then I just kind of let it go and it drifted off, almost like totally broken. And then I woke up out of it, and yeah, when I woke up out of it, the whole right side of my body was numb, like it had been electrocuted.
Wow.
Yeah, and it took a couple minutes for my feeling to return. Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah. So, these entities are out there, but there are certain conditions that they need in order to get greater access to you. And so much of that depends on your mindset, your vibe, how it's not just your emotions, it's also your root assumptions about who you are. Because if you're like a targeted individual and you're dealing with these gang-stalking forces, it doesn't matter what you do if your root assumption is that they have all the power and you don't. Like, oh, they are what? Like some sort of Illuminati organization or some sort of a black ops corporation thing that,
it's
is
all powerful. Like,
yeah, that's all powerful.
I'm just little old me,
Yeah, right. And there's some justification to believing that if you're getting directed energy weapon phenomena, electronics being fried or holes being punched in your walls through these I don't know what they are. I think they're probably electrogravitational beams of some sort, like little lasers, like gravity lasers, that they can cause a lot of problems. So you see it's physical, you see it's happening, and you can't stop it. And then, of course, you're going to think you're powerless. But
and you believe that it really is all purely physical.
Right. Yeah. So you're operating from the wrong assumptions.
A lot of wrong root assumptions.
Yeah. It's like you're already hanging yourself by the noose of your own wrong assumptions.
Yeah.
Or maybe you're standing on sand instead of a solid foundation. So, of course, you're not going to build a solid solution to this problem. And so that's why I think your book, Chasing Phantoms, why it's definitely on the hit list.
Okay.
So it's on the blacklist because
I'm not trying to be egotistical. I mean, I'm just replying like what people have told me. Like, I would never have thought that would happen, or that it would it would matter, but man, yeah, the stories I've heard from people.
Right, because it's neither the new age, pretend negativity doesn't exist. Mm-hmm. It's not that, and it's also not the typical, here's all about MILABs in the most alarmist, negative way possible.
Right, exactly. It's like, I mean, I'm not saying this egotistically, but it really, especially at the time it came out, there was nothing else like it saying what I was saying that I'm aware of, with regards specifically to MILABs and black helicopters and abductions and mind control programming and that stuff. So it had a lot of, I was trying to bring new things to the table. I'm not going to just rehash what's already been said. I mean, there's no point to write a book if you don't have something new, to bring. Right. And so, the book is filled with that, like different, like a new take on a lot of things and different insights and solutions that I have learned firsthand. So I'm passing it along. It's like a manual here. This is what you can do if this is happening to you. And it works. And that's why it has been suppressed. It's why people have experienced such problems when they try to read it. Like they get scramble brain. Voices will tell them to go lay down and go to sleep. Or they try to print the book and then the printer will work until it gets to part 2, which is specifically about my life anecdotes going back to childhood. That is very useful for people to corroborate against their own experiences. And that's when the printer will break and it just won't print anything beyond chapter 1. Which, chapter 2 and beyond it gets really important. But just all kinds of stuff. Or they just have a very strong feeling, like, I don't want to read this book, and then if they're aware, they'll push past it, which I've heard from people doing. And then they realize, oh my God, this is like one of the most useful books I ever read, which is so flattering when people tell me that. I'm just blown away. But it's interesting also that they were so discouraged to even look at it.
Especially considering it's a free book. They don't even have to buy it.
Yeah. I mean, you can buy the physical copy, but I have given it away in complete, the whole book for free since day one. It's always been free. Mm-hmm. So, because I want people to be able to be helped by it. So that's another damaging thing against the negs, is that I made it so accessible to everybody. Yeah,
and it's pretty easy to read too.
Yeah, very.
Right.
So I mean, the things that have happened to people trying to read it, it's very eye opening. And because the number one, I think, one of the most important things we could ever discover about what this place really is, that a lot of times what we think is the physical isn't really. And there's that bleed over, that intertwining thing like you were describing between the physical and the non.
Yeah, I mean, there's a lot of complex factors that are involved. I mean, I would say that consciousness, like your vibe, your frequency, your mindset, your assumptions, that's probably 80% of it, maybe 90% of it. But then you still have a remainder, which involves other things, like, for example, astrology, like your astrological weather, like the current astrological things that are happening. I mean, those are also etheric/astral patterns, probably, or vibrations or something that are impacting Earth at a particular time. And I think that also affects the way that reality is stitched together by the Matrix story maker. So during certain really bad astrological alignments, bad things can happen more easily. But it's not a reflection of, you're a bad person, you got bad vibes, you got bad assumptions. No, not at all. You could be the exact same as you were last month, but now probabilities have shifted slightly because now we've got additional occult factors that are affecting things. Entities, they can make use of that. They can make use of astrology. They can make use of your biorhythm cycles. They can make use of like solar flares, things like that disturb reality somehow. They know when that happens and they take advantage of it. It's almost like the veil becomes thinner, mm-hmm. or the gates of hell are slightly loosened or something, if you're going to put it metaphorically. Something like that. Those things, they affect our everyday experiences in addition to our own, like what we ourselves project consciously, right? And then that's all in addition to physics, just like pure cause and effect. And we also, of course, have higher protection, but it doesn't always intervene directly. Like with the bee example, it let that happen because it kind of knew that you'd be okay and you'd get a valuable lesson out of it. It
intervened only in the sense of keeping me and Kitty inside and then let the rest happen and mm-hmm. let the rest of it play out as it needed to play out,
Yeah, and that's the reason why we don't live in a perfect, sunny, Teletubby land reality. Because if we did, then nothing would ever happen and we wouldn't see or experience or learn or grow anyway.
Right.
So it seems like the protection is pretty much only there to keep things from getting too far out of hand.
Right. Like if there's going to be a complete extreme free will violation of epic proportions where you could die, you know what I mean? And that's what would have happened had me and Kitty been outside. Somebody was going to die, with that angry swarm of bees. So just keep us inside. That's the bare minimum it needs to do, and let the rest of it play out. So, I mean, but you're not going to learn anything if you live in a Teletubby land.
Yeah, and it's definitely not going to stop the gambles or the risks that occasionally come your way, which most likely will end up positive, but there's really no guarantee. Because, some people, they don't learn lessons too well, or they just don't have a lot of self-awareness or intuition. Mm-hmm. So they're the ones that, when a gamble comes their way, most of the time they lose. They keep reacting the wrong way. And they regret it down the line, but in that moment, they're just, oh, I was young, I was dumb, and I did this and that. You know how it works.
Yeah.
And unfortunately, when you do lose those gambles, they do have permanent consequences.
Yeah.
Right? So even if reality isn't fully real, as people think it is, there are still consequences. It's still a consequential process.
Yeah.
That we have to deal with.
It's a game, but there is some serious aspects to it,
Yeah. So it definitely shows that our frequency is an important component, but it's not the only factor, but it's an important factor. Our vibes might pull these negative things in, but there's always a little remnant that is independent, that's based on factors that are outside of our control. Sometimes, especially with abductions, it's just a matter of weakness. You can't be lucid 24/7 unless you put a lot of training into building up your self-awareness throughout the day. Then you can do it, It is possible to build up continuity of consciousness, to be lucid every single moment of every single day. But to do that, it's almost like getting a PhD in conscious development. Mm-hmm. So people like Rudolf Steiner, for example, he could do it because he's just that kind of guy. He was like an occult genius.
Yeah.
With the level of training that he went through. But most of us can't. And so there's that factor, the fact that we can't always have our guard up constantly. So of course things are going to slip through periodically that are not really a fault of our vibes. It's just, a simple matter of fact that we let our guard down. So there's that. There's also physical causality. A typical example is if you keep driving a car, eventually the tires will get so bald they're going to pop. That's just causality. That's cause and effect. It doesn't matter if you have a good vibe or a bad vibe. Eventually those tires are going to pop. Right. So a lot of what happens in reality seems to be a mix between just sheer physics or sheer etheric laws, etheric occult laws, that and consciousness, synchronicity, symbolism, your vibes, mindset, assumptions, everything. It's like this weird fractal interplay between these two sides of existence, the more programmed mechanical side, and then the more conscious, symbolic, dreamlike side of it. And I think that really figures into what reality ultimately is. And I think that's what I'll get into in the next part.